There are defeats that happen in public, and then there are defeats that happen inside a man. The first kind wounds the reputation. The second kind wounds the identity. Most people recover from the first. Few recover from the second, because when a reputation breaks, you lose what others think of you. When an identity breaks, you lose what you think of yourself. And there is no pain more unsettling. Long ago, in the mountains of northern Japan, there lived an archer named Renji. His skill was spoken of in villages he had never visited. Travelers carried stories of him over rivers and through forests. Some claimed he could strike a falling leaf before it touched the ground. Others said he could hear the direction of the wind before the trees felt it. The stories grew larger with every telling. Renji never corrected them. He had spent 40 years becoming the man those stories describe. Or so he believed. At 62 years old, he was invited to participate in the Festival of Autumn Skies, a gathering where the finest archers in the region demonstrated their mastery before nobles, merchants, monks, and warriors. Thousands attended. The final challenge was simple. An ivory disc no larger than a coin was suspended from a distant tower. The archers would shoot from nearly 100 paces. Only one arrow, only one chance. The crowd expected Renji to succeed. Renji expected Renji to succeed. That was the problem. When his turn arrived, silence spread across the valley. He stepped forward, raised his bow, drew the string, and for the first time in decades, he became aware of the audience. He felt their expectations. He felt the weight of his reputation. He felt the fear of disappointing them. The bowstring trembled, just slightly, barely enough for anyone to notice, but enough. The arrow flew. The crowd followed its path and watched it miss, not by much, but enough. A gasp rolled through the valley. The disc remained untouched. Renji lowered his bow. Something inside him shattered, not because he missed, because he discovered how much he needed not to miss. For 40 years he had believed he was serving the art of archery. Now he saw the truth. He had been serving his image. The festival ended. The crowd went home. The stories changed. And 3 days later Renji disappeared into the mountains with his young apprentice, Akio. The villagers assumed he was hiding from embarrassment. They were wrong. He was searching for something. Something he had lost long before he missed the target. Something far more important than aim. For the next 7 years, Renji would teach Akio 7 lessons. Not about archery. Not really. About life. About freedom. About seeing clearly. Because the arrow that missed the moon had revealed something impossible to ignore. A man can spend decades mastering the world while remaining a stranger to himself. And that discovery was the beginning of everything. Chapter 1. Cage. The shadow, the enemy you refused to face. 3 months after leaving the village, Akio noticed a strange habit. Every morning before sunrise, Renji sat beside a small stream. He did not meditate. He did not pray. He simply stared into the water. One morning Akio finally asked, "What are you looking at?" Renji smiled. "My enemy." Akio looked around. The forest was empty. "There is nobody here." "There is always somebody here." Renji pointed toward the water. Akio stepped closer. The stream reflected Renji's face. "You mean yourself?" Renji nodded. "The most dangerous enemy a man will ever face is the one wearing his own face." Akio frowned. "I don't understand." Renji picked up a stone. He dropped it into the stream. Ripples distorted the reflection. "When I was young, I thought my enemies were other archers." Another stone. "When I grew older, I thought my enemies were failure and criticism." Another stone. "When I became famous, I thought my enemies were rivals." The water settled. Renji looked directly at his reflection. "I was wrong. What was the enemy?" "My fear." Akio remained silent. Renji continued, "The fear of being ordinary, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of losing admiration, the fear of no longer being special." He paused. "Those fears controlled my decisions for decades." The old archer traced a finger through the water. "We all have a shadow. the parts of ourselves we do not wish to see, the insecurities, the jealousies, the pride, the fears, we hide them from others. Then he smiled sadly. Eventually we hide them from ourselves. Akio stared at the stream. So the shadow grows stronger. No, Renji shook his head. It grows invisible. And invisible enemies are the most dangerous. Used earlier, during the festival. Renji believed he was afraid of missing. But that was not true. He was afraid of losing admiration. The Nis nearly exposed what had always been there. The crowd did not create his fear. The crowd revealed it. This is the first lesson. Most suffering is not caused by reality. It is caused by the shadow we refuse to acknowledge, the anger we call justice, the pride we call confidence, the fear we call caution, the attachment we call love. Everything hidden eventually governs us. Everything faced begins to lose power. That morning, Renji handed Akio a small journal. Every night, he said, write down one truth about yourself you would rather not admit. Akio looked uncertain. That sounds uncomfortable. Renji laughed. Exactly. Then the old archer stood. The path to freedom begins where comfort ends. And for the first time, Akio realized that wisdom was not the accumulation of knowledge. It was the removal of illusion. Chapter 2. N.A. The sacred Pausion year after leaving the village, Renji and Akio arrived at a narrow mountain pass. The journey had been difficult. Food was scarce. Winter was approaching. And for the first time since becoming his apprentice, Akio was beginning to doubt his teacher. Renji seemed to spend more time sitting than training, more time observing than acting, more time listening than speaking. It made no sense. One evening, frustration finally overcame him. Master, Akio said. Renji looked up from the fire. Yes, when are we going to continue? Renji smiled. We are continuing. No, Akio shook his head. I mean our training. The old archer fed another branch into the flames. Why do you believe training has stopped? Because we haven't practiced for weeks. We have practiced every day. How? Renji pointed toward the darkness. What do you hear? Akio listened. Wind. Crickets. The distant sound of water. Nature. No, Renji said softly. You hear time. Akio frowned. The old man continued. Tell me, why do most people make poor decisions? They lack knowledge. Sometimes. Renji nodded. But usually they lack patience. The fire cracked. A shower of sparks rose toward the stars. When fear appears, they react. When anger appears, they react. When opportunity appears, they react. When loss appears, they react. Everything becomes reaction. Renji drew a line in the dirt. The gap between stimulus and response is where wisdom lives. Akio stared at the line. Renji continued. The Japanese call this ma. The sacred space, the meaningful pause, the interval that gives shape to everything. He pointed toward the stars. Music exists because of silence. He pointed toward the valley. Architecture exists because of empty space. Then he tapped his chest. Wisdom exists because of pause. Akio was quiet. The old archer leaned back. The greatest mistake of my life happened because I lost. Ma? The festival. Renji nodded. I felt fear, and I immediately obeyed it. I felt pressure, and I immediately believed it. I never paused long enough to see what was happening inside me. The firelight danced across his weathered face. Most people believe power comes from action. He shook his head. Power comes from choosing when not to act. For the next month, Renji gave Akio an unusual exercise. Whenever a strong emotion appeared, he was forbidden from responding immediately. If he felt anger, he waited. If he felt excitement, he waited. If he felt fear, he waited. If he felt certainty, he waited. At first it felt unbearable. The urge to react was almost physical. But slowly something changed. He began noticing things. He noticed how emotions rose and fell like weather, how certainty often dissolved after an hour, how anger frequently vanished by morning. How many of his important decisions would have been mistakes had he acted immediately. One evening he shared this realization. Renji laughed. Congratulations. For what? You have discovered that not every thought deserves obedience. And that night Akio learned the second lesson. The strongest people are not those who control the world. They are those who refuse to be controlled by their first impulse. The pause is not weakness. The pause is mastery. Chapter 3. The mind like water following spring. Renji brought Akio to a hidden lake. The water was perfectly still. Mountains reflected across its surface with such precision that the sky seemed to continue beneath the earth. Look, Akio looked. What do you see? The mountains? The clouds? The trees? Renji nodded. Then he picked up a stone. The stone struck the center of the lake. Ripples exploded outward. The reflection shattered. The mountains twisted. The sky broke apart. Everything became distorted. What do you see now? The same things. No, Renji replied. I see confusion. The old archer folded his hands. Reality has not changed. The mountains remain. The sky remains. The water alone has changed. Hours passed. Lake slowly became calm again. The reflection returned. Only then did Renji speak. This is the human mind. When calm, it reflects reality. When disturbed, it reflects distortion. Akio remembered countless moments, arguments, fears, assumptions, embarrassments. All of them had felt unquestionably true in the moment, yet later they often proved false. You mean we cannot trust our thoughts? Renji shook his head. You cannot trust a disturbed mind, just as you cannot trust a disturbed lake. The old archer stood. When people are anxious, they see threats everywhere. When they are angry, they see enemies everywhere. When they are proud, they see certainty everywhere. The emotion becomes the lens. Then they mistake the lens for reality. Renji smiled. This is why so many people suffer. They are fighting reflections, not truth. For weeks they remained beside the lake, learning stillness. Learning observation. Learning how to watch thoughts without becoming them. One morning Akio asked, when does the mind become completely calm? Renji laughed so hard birds flew from nearby trees. Never. Then what is the goal? The goal is not to stop the ripples. The goal is to stop mistaking the ripples for the lake. And with those words, Akio understood something most people spend their entire lives missing. Peace is not the absence of disturbance. Peace is the ability to see beyond it. Chapter 4 Gratitude for what was taken away on summer afternoon. Akio found Renji sitting beneath an old pine tree. The old archer was holding the bow he had used at the festival years ago. For a long time, he simply stared at it. What are you thinking about? Akio asked. Renji smiled. The best thing that ever happened to me. Akio looked surprised. The bow? The theater? Akio almost laughed. You call that the best thing that happened to you? Renji nodded. Without it, I would still be asleep. The apprentice sat beside him. Renji ran his fingers across the wood. For most of my life, I believed success was a blessing, and failure a curse. He shook his head. Now I know neither is true. Wind moved gently through the trees. The things we gain often blind us. The things we lose often reveal us. Renji explained that before the festival, he had been surrounded by praise. People respected him, admired him, listened to him. But slowly, without noticing, he had become dependent on it, like a man drinking salt water. The more recognition he received, the more he needed. Then the failure took everything away. His reputation, his certainty, his identity. At the time it felt like destruction. Years later he saw it differently. The defeat had removed the chains he could not see. Most people spend their lives asking why hardship happened. Renji said, a wiser question is this: what did hardship make possible? Akio thought about those words for a long time. And that day he learned, some losses arrive as these. Only later do we discover they were teachers. Chapter 5. The strength found in silence. Following winter they crossed a valley famous for its monasteries. The monks rarely spoke. Days passed without conversation. At first Akio found it uncomfortable, then unbearable. Then enlightening. Began noticing something strange. The less he spoke, the more he heard. The less he explained himself, the more he understood himself. One evening he asked Renji, "Why are people afraid of silence?" The old archer answered immediately, "Because silence removes distractions, and distractions protect us from ourselves." The answer unsettled him. Renji continued, "When there is noise, we can avoid difficult questions. When there is entertainment, we can avoid reflection. When there is constant activity, we can avoid seeing what lives inside us." The old man pointed toward a frozen lake. When the water is disturbed, you cannot see the bottom. When it becomes still, everything hidden appears. That winter Akio spent many hours alone. No conversations. No books. No instruction. Only observation. At first he discovered boredom, then restlessness. Then fear. And beneath all of it clarity. For the first time in his life, he could hear his own thoughts without interruption. When spring arrived, Renji gave him the fifth lesson. The world teaches people how to speak. Very few learn how to listen, and fewer still learn how to listen to themselves. Silence is not empty. Silence is where truth becomes audible. Chapter 6. The Unfinished Circle. Years passed. Akio became an extraordinary archer. One morning he asked a question that had been growing inside him for years. "When does mastery end?" Renji looked amused. "It doesn't." The apprentice frowned. "There must be a point where someone becomes complete." Without answering, Renji picked up a brush. On a sheet of paper he painted a circle, but he left a small gap. The circle was unfinished. There, he handed it to Akio. The apprentice stared at it. "It's incomplete." "Exactly." Renji smiled. "That is why it is beautiful." Akio did not understand. Old archer continued, "Most people believe happiness waits at the end of improvement. They imagine a future version of themselves, perfect, confident, wise, complete." He shook his head. "That person does not exist. The moment you solve one weakness, another appears. The moment you reach one summit, another rises beyond it. Life is not a destination. Life is a path." Unfinished circle represented acceptance. Acceptance that growth never ends. Acceptance that becoming is more important than arriving. Acceptance that imperfection is not failure. It is evidence that you are still alive. That evening Akio placed the painting beside his bed. Years later, it remained his most treasured possession. Chapter 7. The Path of the Moon. Renji was old now. His hair had become completely white. His steps had slowed, but his eyes carried a peace Akio had never seen before. One night they sat beneath a full moon. The mountains glowed silver. The world felt timeless. Akio asked one final question. "What is the secret?" Renji smiled. "The secret to what?" "A meaningful life." The old archer looked toward the moon. For a long time he said nothing. Then he spoke. "Look at the moon." Akio did. "It shines over kings and beggars, over saints and thieves. It does not choose. It does not compete. It does not seek recognition. It simply fulfills its nature." The old man turned toward his student. "People exhaust themselves trying to become extraordinary. They chase admiration. They chase status. They chase importance. They spend their lives asking how to shine brighter." Renji pointed toward the moon. "The moon never asks. It simply shines." The lesson struck Akio with unexpected force. For years he had pursued mastery. For years he had pursued improvement. Now he understood. The goal was not greatness. The goal was authenticity. Not becoming more, but becoming fully yourself. And perhaps that was the deepest wisdom of all. Why Renji never needed his reputation back after Renji died. People once again spoke his name. Stories spread. Legends grew. Many remembered the master archer. Few remembered the man, but Akio remembered. He remembered the silence, the lake. The mountains, the unfinished circle, the moon. And he understood something that the world often forgets. Renji's greatest achievement was not his accuracy, not his reputation, not his fame. His greatest achievement was freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from approval. Freedom from perfection. Freedom from the endless need to prove himself. The arrow that missed the target had not ruined his life. It had revealed it. And perhaps that is true for all of us. The moment that breaks us is often the moment that introduces us to who we really are. The mess, the loss. The disappointment, the failure. These are not always endings. Sometimes they are invitations. Invitations to become someone deeper than success could ever create. Because the moon does not shine by trying, the moon shines by being. And the same is true for you. The path has never been about becoming extraordinary. The path has always been about becoming real. The lesson is complete, but the journey is not, because every sunrise offers the same question. Will you spend today proving yourself or becoming yourself?